Margaret sat on the worn wooden bench outside the diner, watching the autumn leaves dance across the empty parking lot. At 78 years old, she had learned that life's most precious moments often arrived when you weren't expecting them. Her husband had passed 5 years ago, and her children had moved to distant cities for their careers. She didn't blame them. Life pulled people forward whether you wanted to follow or not. But the loneliness had a way of creeping in during the quiet hours. When the house felt too big and her heart felt too small, she clutched her purse as she always did, mentally counting the few dollars inside. Her pension barely covered the rent and groceries, but she had learned to make do. There was something about hardship that taught you what truly mattered. Money was just paper after all. What mattered was kindness, connection, and the small mercies that made life bearable. The man appeared like a shadow pulled from desperation itself. He sat down beside her without asking, his leather jacket bearing the scars of 1,000 miles. His name was Jack, though she didn't know that yet. What she knew was that he was hungry. She could see it in how his eyes lingered on the diner's menu board, in how his shoulders curved inward as if he was trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable. She recognized hunger not because she had ever gone without a meal for long, but because she recognized the shame that accompanied it. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice gentle as spring rain. Jack looked at her with surprise. People rarely acknowledged him anymore. When you lived on the road with nothing but a motorcycle and a backpack, society had a way of making you invisible. He nodded, and something about her presence made him feel safe enough to be honest. He told her about the job that fell through, the money that was promised but never came. He told her about sleeping in his bike because gas prices had eaten through his last paycheck. He told her about considering doing things he wasn't proud of just to survive another week. Margaret listened without judgment, the way only someone who had truly lived could listen. She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. Inside was exactly $10, her emergency fund, the money she had been saving to replace the worn-out shoes she had been limping around in. She pressed it into Jack's calloused hand. "Take this," she said simply. Jack's eyes widened. "I can't." "Yes, you can." "And you will," Margaret interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom earned through decades of living. "Because once someone gave me a chance when I had nothing. I promised myself that if I ever had something to give, I would give it without hesitation." Jack wanted to refuse, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the genuine warmth in her eyes, or maybe it was the recognition that sometimes accepting kindness from a stranger was the first step toward believing in yourself again. He took the money, and Margaret watched as he walked into the diner. She couldn't afford to follow him inside, but she didn't need to. She knew he would eat, and for tonight, that was enough. She didn't expect anything in return. Kindness, she had learned, was its own reward. The universe didn't keep score, and neither should she. What she didn't know was that Jack did something radical with that $10. He bought a cheap meal, yes, but more importantly, he used the diner's Wi-Fi to send an email to his motorcycle club. He had been riding solo for months, burned by betrayals and his own poor choices, but something about that old woman's generosity cracked open the hardened shell around his heart. He reconnected with his brothers, the riders he had met over the years, the community he had pushed away when things got dark. He told them about Margaret, about how a stranger's kindness had reminded him that humanity still existed. The motorcycle club was called the Guardians. And they have built themselves around a simple principle. They protected and helped those who couldn't protect themselves. The next morning, 50 riders assembled in that diner's parking lot. They came on every kind of motorcycle imaginable, Harleys and Hondas, vintage bikes and modern machines. They came together for one purpose: to find the elderly woman who had shown their brother grace. When he had none left for himself, Margaret was walking to the bus stop when she saw them. At first she felt fear. 50 motorcycles filling the street, their engines roaring to life in unison. But then she saw Jack, and his face was filled with such gratitude and joy that her fear evaporated. The riders had organized a collection, and what they raised was enough to do more than replace her shoes. They had pooled their resources to cover 6 months of her rent, but the money was the least of what they gave her. The riders came back, week after week. They fixed her leaky roof, painted her front door a cheerful blue, and brought her groceries. They taught her how to connect with her children through video calls. They sat with her during her isolation and reminded her that community wasn't built on bloodlines alone. They told her stories of their own struggles and how small acts of kindness had saved them. Through Margaret, they found purpose. Through them, Margaret found a reason to get out of bed each morning. Jack became her guardian angel in leather and chrome. He moved into an apartment nearby and visited every day without fail. He brought her flowers and told her about his dreams of starting a legitimate motorcycle repair business. Margaret lent him money from her pension, and he started small. Years later, that business employed 7 people from the motorcycle club who had nowhere else to turn. Margaret lived to be 93, surrounded by the family she never expected to have. On her deathbed, she was surrounded not just by her biological children who had finally realized what they had missed, but by dozens of riders who had become her sons and daughters. She had given $10 to a stranger on a bench, and in return she had received a life filled with purpose, connection, and love beyond measure. She had learned what fate truly meant, not something that happened to you, but something you created through the courage to be kind when kindness cost everything. And in that final moment, as she closed her eyes, she knew that the seeds she had planted would continue to grow, that somewhere down the line, one of those riders would sit on a bench and give their last $10 to a stranger, continuing the cycle of grace that she had started all those years ago.